All right, we are back from break. You can see one of us is missing right now, but he'll be back just in just 1 sec. But figured we'd get this topic started first. And the next topic is online gaming and a lot of the, I guess, cool, the good parts of it and the bad parts of it in terms of being a parent and having our kids, subject to some of the things that happen with the gaming. I figured I'd start off. Let's switch up the order a little bit. John, you ready to talk about the topic? I know you just got back.
Which one?
Just online gaming. Just online gaming and the good and the bad of it, in terms of being a parent and having kids.
Oh, sure. So I walked down to my basement one time. My son was probably 10. He was playing Call of Duty, and I hear through the speakers on the TV, fag this, fag that, f this, f that. You're a homo.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Standard.
Yeah. You know what, though? It's funny, though. I think about it. It's really no worse than what I did. I mean, shit. Wheat and I played against some Euros in the transatlantic thing that was Quake 4 TDM. And when I would get pissed, I'd drop the F-bomb like crazy, and we were getting videotaped. But so I did it, and my son grew up hearing me play Quake, playing Quake and playing in tournaments, like, oh, you motherfucker. And, but, I'm a dad now. So when I hear he's downstairs and he's 10 years old and he's playing with guys that are 16, 17, some of them older, and they're using all sorts of crazy language, it was a little bothersome. I tried to, I tried to put the clamp down and say, no, you can play online, but I don't want you in the lobby where you can hear everything. Just play. And I tried that, but I did what I thought was right at the time. Really, how's it any different than him going over to his buddy's house and they're sitting around for hours playing? When I was a kid, played Nintendo, we'd play hockey, Nintendo hockey, and we would cuss the shit out of each other. It was kind of just part of it, right? So I kind of gave up on really trying to censor that from him and just let him be a part of it. I mean, if I heard too much craziness or a lot of sexist or racial stuff, obviously I said something about it, but it is what it is, I guess. I mean, I can't really say much about it. I don't have a huge problem with it. Because I think everyone's there to game. I mean, there's very few people there that are there to like troll people or bully people. It does happen. It happens with everything we do. Shit, it could happen I get random messages on Skype. People looking to have me check out their cam. But oh yeah, and I don't know why I add them. I just add them. They're like, hey, you want to be my contact? I'm like, okay, I don't know who you are.
You're talking about that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, and then they're like, check out your cam. So this sort of stuff happens even to us every day, and it's going to happen. But I think in gaming, it really is pretty safe. I mean, everyone's there to play video games, and really the only part of it that's pretty shitty is it can get pretty brutal at times, and people can be pretty rude to each other. I mean, Richard's not always nice to everyone. I'm not always nice to everyone. And shit happens. So
Right.
I got a real fucking problem with online games, man.
All right, go for it, Rich.
I
Rich,
do, man.
Rich, why don't you go next?
I got a real big fucking problem with it.
All right, okay, Marcus, you go.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm gonna
Just jump in.
So here's my problem with it. First off, thank God for mute, right? Like that was
God,
one of
seriously.
the skills that my kid and I mean, because I used it all the time. Like, I just will not have any problem shutting some dumb fuck up, just straight up. And you teach your kids that right away. And it's just like you get them trained to ignore, right? And then that's really the best way that you can go about it. Because I hate it when I have to say to him, dude, I think you just need to play on a different server. Because I don't want him to feel like he just got bullied out of that server, and so like why do I even want to play? It's just not a good environment to have him in. But here's the real problem I got with online gaming is that people seem to be fucking okay with with like the exchanges that people have with one another. And when you raise a kid, and when gaming becomes a big part of it, and when online gaming retains this, this anonymous aspect of it, allows you to be a total dickhead, I feel like we're teaching kids in this new generation a really terrible habit of like, that's the way you act. Fucking bullshit. That is not the way you act, right? When I was growing up, we might not have been playing online games, but you know what? When we were together, it was friendly. There wasn't. I mean, you weren't yelling massive profanities at your friend. Like, that's not how we acted. So I don't understand why it became okay for people to act that way. You know, like, am I guilty? Yeah, absolutely. I'm guilty. I also am, young. I saw the error of my ways, and and I did become a father, and that does change your perspective. But if I could go back and do it, when I first started in esports, I was a fucking dick. I was a dick because partially I didn't realize any sort of impact that anything was going to have on anything. But other than that, I was just I was a younger, dumb kid. And it really annoys me that people think that it's okay to do that. And that's why I get so frustrated when people who I believe could at least have the decency to act like fucking adults in something like Twitch chat or online. I have no problem booting their ass out. Like, I will one day achieve the utopia of everyone acting decently to one another. I'm not okay with it.
Should we just remove Richard from our show now then?
Yeah, I was gonna say, man. Like, I don't belong in the utopia. That's it. I'm fucking out. I'm done. But no, I know what you're saying, and you're right. It's definitely a generational thing, because when I was engaged in any competitive pursuit, be it computer games or fucking playing an actual sport, like every time I tackled someone in rugby, you don't push the face down into the mud as you get up on them and go, "I'll fucking see you later, fag," or whatever. Like, you don't get to do that. And if you were to talk down to somebody like that and you got caught doing it, chances are your own coach would pull you off. The pitch. You wouldn't really get to complete the game because you have to embody the attitude. And rugby's a great sport for that, because at the end of the game, you line up, and the losing side makes a tunnel for the winning side. You have to stand there. It doesn't matter how pissed off you are. You got to applaud them off, right? Shake hands, they go through, and then they do the same for you, and you go through their tunnel and get into the dressing room. And that's again. So this concept of like being a good sport always seemed to be prevalent in there. And then it was a fucking shock for me. Like, when I first started playing, my very first experience, I was writing an article for a magazine which didn't get picked up, but they said, we want you to basically, it was going to be called The Noob. And what I did was I invaded online, communities.
Oh, God.
And I learned about them, right? And then I wrote an article about my experiences, and that was going to be the series of articles. And I was the noob. And of course, who better? Because I was a fucking massive noob. Like, I mean, I didn't play online games at all, really. So it was 2005, and Counter-Strike Source had just come out, and they said start there. So I went onto a server, and I was like trying to learn the fucking thing. I hadn't played a PC-based FPS, only ever played console. So I was like, what the fuck? Like, so I'm moving around. So like, I'm looking at the guns, okay, and I see a P90, and it's got 50 bullets. I'm like, 50 bullets? Brilliant, right? So I'm just running around, wazdering with a P90, getting my head ripped off, and I'm thinking, right, it appears that bullets are good, but only at close quarters. Like, rifles are better at long range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit in this corner, and I'm just, if anyone goes past the door, I'm just going to shoot them, right?
Camper.
And I beat the system. I figured it out. I'm a fucking genius. And of course, what I am is a camping faggot, which I didn't realize. I didn't know I was a camping faggot. I thought I was playing intelligently. So I'm crouched there with a P90 behind some barrels, and I must get like 6 or 7 kills. And I'm doing the same thing, like round after round after round after round. And I cannot understand why people hate me. Like, people are going fucking mental. They're, telling me what they're going to do to me, get off the server. They're calling for an admin. And I'm like, guys, like, I'm just playing the game. Like, we're all adults here. And evidently, fucking, it was crazy. Anyway, eventually I got to know the people who were flaming me, right? Like, we started hanging out on TeamSpeak. and they taught me about the do's and the don'ts of the esports scene. And 6 months down the line, when I was getting camped by a guy, I didn't remember that I started out like that. I was there with my new friends on TeamSpeak, going, look at this fucking camping faggot, going absolutely mental in the same way. So it's weird how that kind of like, almost like pervasive nature of the game and being part of a group can almost lead you to forget about what it is fundamentally at the core. And then once you go further up the food chain, 'cause that's just public play, that's just HL stats, right? And you'd be amazed how people take that seriously. But then, if you get a team and you join an ED ladder, enemy down, or a little ladder at ESL or whatever, all of a sudden you look down on public players. Like, oh, fuck those guys, right? It's so pathetic to care about your stats, even though that's all you cared about predominantly before you went competitive. And then, you know, so you keep creating this new culture of elitism. Then it's you go to LAN. Oh, well, you guys only play in online leagues and ladders. We go to fucking LANs, yeah? So we're better than you. So you keep constantly creating this almost like these tiers, this hierarchy within the scene. And it pretty much encourages you to be negative about the people beneath it. It's really weird. Like, it's a very for such a niche community, it's very fucking segregated. And I've never, you know, I now that I'm older, it does make me cringe a little bit. Especially in the Counter-Strike community where it's particularly vicious. But I don't think it's ever gonna I don't think we're ever gonna outgrow that because of like the average age of the people who play it and stuff like that.
I mean, it's like, what are we supposed to do? You know, you're reaching that utopia, Bleed. I don't even know what we're supposed to do because, like, on Xbox, I'll just give you an example of myself. I don't know how many times I've played NBA 2K or Madden or Call of Duty, and I just happen to have my headset on. I don't even say a word, okay? You know me. And I don't even say a word, and he's just like just bitching me out. Whooped it, I whoop him, and then he goes and leaves me about 20 messages on Xbox Live, right? These recorded messages. I mean, it's like, what are you supposed to do about that? You can't do anything about that.
All I can do is try to make what I do better.
Yeah.
You know, like, if that means that I will ban every dipshit from chat and I will just mute every person or ignore every person I ever come across on online, then, I know I can't change the world, but I can do my part. So that's why, like I said one day, one troll at a time.
No, but online gaming is just, online gaming in general is amazing. Just being able to play just with thousands, millions of people around the world. And I agree with you too, Weed. It's like I definitely don't. I actually don't let my kids like have audio at all, like from this chat channel whenever they're playing on the consoles and that sort of thing, because one difference, John, between playing with your friends and just just talking trash to each other and that sort of thing, you're not talking to some random X-aged person on the end of it, right? Like your son's not probably doing that. 9-year-old, 10-year-old son's not doing that. He's actually talking to another 9-year-old, 10-year-old, and they might be saying, cursing at each other and shit like that, but they're not potentially saying things that are very, very inappropriate, right, for that person. So that's where it gets a little bit crazy in that regard.
And I found myself guilty of that. Like at the moment, God, this is shameful to admit, but at the moment, my account on League of Legends is banned, right?
A lot of people's are, man. A lot of people's are.
Right, okay. Yeah, but here's the thing. I said some fucking outrageous flame to this dude. And I think it's easy when you're playing a game to sort of think, the guy's like me. He's going to be the same age, the same guy. The only difference is he's shit and I'm not, right? That's pretty much the only degree of separation. So I fucking ripped on this guy so bad. And then afterwards he was like, I'm 13. And I was like, oh my fucking God. Like, it was just like the lowest fucking ebb. Like, here I am, a grown fucking man. Like, serious, like. And I have just gone absolutely spare at some 13-year-old kid, like calling him, also, I'm not even going to fucking repeat it. But it's the kind of stuff I wouldn't want said in front of a fucking 13-year-old, right? Like, if I heard somebody talking like that in front of a kid, I'd get all like, what do you think you're doing, man? Like, but I've just gone and fucking done it on the internet, and it's just like, It's very hard, I think, to be so fucking hyper aware like that. A, these are real people. B, these might be very young people, especially in a game like League of Legends. And like Marcus says, sometimes you've got to be the guy who leads by example. If you act in the basest fucking way. If the game brings that out of you, you know, you need to fucking take a look at yourself before you start talking about other shit. So I definitely fucking know that it can be bad for young guys, because I've been that guy making it bad for a young guy. But, you know,
Right.
I got banned, so, you know, justice was served, right? So,
Yeah, so I guess the League of Legends Tribunal is doing its job in some regard.
Apparently.
it's keeping assholes like me away from your kids.
Oh God.
Let's hear it for the tribunal.
Seriously. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Next topic we got is violence in games and the effects of it on kids. And I know John and Wheat here have been on the radio show talking about this exact thing, but I thought it might be appropriate just to maybe rehash some of it with Richard and myself. But yeah, in general, I just wanted to talk about just violence in games, and because recently, you know, this always happens when something crazy or bad happens in society. There's always some article, right, that's talking about some kind of video games, right? And then the most recent one was the Washington Navy Yard gunman obsessed with violent games like Call of Duty, that sort of thing, right? And here's an article that's talking about it. Yeah, so what do you guys think about just the games, violent games, particularly the ones that are supposed to be realistic, like Call of Duty? I mean, they're meant to be, you know, as realistic as possible, and the effects of it on the kids. Like, do you think they should be playing it? And if so, should it be playing it with some type of supervision or parameters and that sort of thing? Who wants to go first? I'll just throw it out there.
I'll dive in a little bit. So the game itself is you have to be 17 to buy it, correct? Call of Duty.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, in some tournaments that have been run, you have to be 17 or 18 to actually even join the tournament. So why is that there? It's there for a reason, right? I mean, maybe whether you believe it or not, our government or whoever has decided that some of these games, like Grand Theft Auto, are probably best to not be in the hands of young people. And there has to be a reason for that. I mean, they've determined that there's some sort of reason. It's just not appropriate. I probably am, when Marcus and I were on the radio show, I mean, we disagree on a few of the items. I'm a big advocate for parents being involved. I mean, imagine how many parents buy this game and they have no clue what the game's about. Okay, what's Grand Theft Auto? Oh, it must be a racing game. There literally are parents out there that have no clue what it is, and they go ahead and buy it for their kids anyway. So parents being involved is very important. But unlike some people, and I call them, gamer fanboys or whatever, people that just play people in our industry that just play games and don't think about things or don't have kids, they're young themselves, they instantly jump on the bandwagon anytime something like this happens and somebody mentions that the killer played Call of Duty for 6 hours. They instantly are like, oh, this has nothing to do with video games. I'm so tired of this. And then they go on Reddit and they make a big joke about it, and they constantly are badgering on anyone that says anything about how it possibly could. Well, I'm one of the few that actually believe that there just has to be something that a game like that does to the psyche of a child. Now, whether it makes them want to kill or not, I don't believe that at all. It's not the video game. But I just think it's pretty naive of us to think that violent video games or violent movies, and we just got done talking about violent conversations, don't have an effect on a child's psyche or somebody's psyche. I mean, at any age, it just depends on where you're at in your maturity level. So I'm one of the few that believes that video games do have an effect on us. Do I think that they're the reason that somebody goes out and kill? No. But I also don't think that the guns are the reason, and we don't have to get into that conversation. But I do think that it has I do think that they can have an effect on a child's psyche, and it's not good.
The first thing I want to say as well is, before we get into this discussion, because it's a fucking adult and serious discussion, I know there's going to be people in the chat who are going to start typing shit like, well, I played games for 20 years and it never affected me. I haven't killed anyone, right? And, it's like the assholes who say, well, my grandmother smoked 40 cigarettes every day and she lived to 105, so there's no such thing as cancer. It's like, look, guys, we cannot talk in fucking broad generalities about such a complex fucking subject. So let's leave that really pathetic summation of a very complex issue at home. Now, I've got a bit of insight into this. My girlfriend is a social worker and she specializes in child protection. And I've been a massive proponent of basically defending video games for years. 2 years ago, I wrote a article in a response to a Panorama BBC documentary, basically saying that, you know, they try to portray gaming and online gaming as like the worst thing ever, and the reason why this Korean couple had let their kids starve to death because they were addicted to games and things like this. You know, they were really laying it on thick, and it was very unprofessional. I wrote a response, and it got quoted by the Independent newspaper. I say it's a national paper over here, and you know, so I'm very much in the camp that games are not intrinsically bad. But equally, I would say to anybody who thinks that exposure to media, and especially interactive media, has no significant impact, well, would you let your kid watch hardcore pornography? You know, would you be comfortable with that? Because if what you're saying is, well, it's not going to affect them negatively in any way, shape, or form, and it's not going to impact on their psyche, then we can say the same about sexualization. They would, you know, they're kids. They don't understand it. They don't understand the broader concept. So where's the problem? And what we actually need to start doing is we need to start looking at having some serious research about how these games do impact on people, and not just children, you know, adults as well. There's been lots of research into the sexualization and exposure of, pornography and whatnot. And that's a big thing right now in Britain. We've just changed all of our internet laws to pretty much mean that you have to opt in to pornography because we're that worried about what it does when kids are exposed to it. So I now need to ring up my internet service provider and say, you know, yeah, I like one off the wrist now and then, which, you know, it seems a bit fucking absurd to have to do it. But the reason for doing that is basically about we see, and again in social work, my girlfriend tells me about it. Some of the cases she has to work, you know, it starts with that. You know, they get exposed to pornography and they get desensitized to sex, and then when the option to when somebody tries to touch them or anything like that, they haven't got that barrier there to maybe associate that it's wrong. Now, I don't think that it's necessarily a great leap to say that in some cases, if some children are exposed to online violence and violent video games that are effectively simulations of killing, that in the absence of good parenting and boundaries and you know, all of that stuff and other things, I don't think it's out of the fucking question that it might have a negative impact on some kids. But the problem is we can't see any commonality or any sort of causation, because we're not even doing the research. You've got pretty much just two camps right now, and that is that all violent video games need to be banned because violence is bad and they make everyone turn into a killer, which is bullshit. But then on the other side, games have no effect. I play games and I'm fine, which is also bullshit. So what we need to do is we need to sort of start actually looking at it, you know, using this thing called science, which is pretty cool, and actually try and figure out what, you know, how these games do impact on people, both adults and children.
Okay, Marcus.
Yeah, to comment off of that, you know, while I agree with Richard, to me, it's beyond video games at that point. Television, movies, just the way that sort of our media covers various things in the world and locally. I mean, I think that all these things, you know, like no one is so honed in on video games that like all of these other things aren't also bombarding their brains too, right? Like you have to consider that in the grand scheme of things, that a 7-year-old growing up today, he's going to see a lot more shit than I saw when I was 7 growing up, just because of the difference in media and the difference in how stuff is delivered to us, and you know what you see every day with your own two eyes. But to specifically to the violent video games, you know, like I am a very family-oriented individual, and in doing so, like my parents, although I'm sure there were days that I hated them and they hated me, like I'm very fortunate to say that my parents, although very hard, they they cared about instilling values in me that I very much hold on to today. And so, as a parent, I feel like I am very flexible with what I allow my son to play and what I expose him to, because I feel like the real development comes from what happens outside of whatever it is they love, whether that is cars or sports or video games or Pokemon or whatever. Like, yeah, there's going to be people that are going to, that say Mini-Wheat should not be playing Counter-Strike. And I totally get it. And if the only thing you ever see of my son is him going crazy and playing some Counter-Strike, then you might think that there's just something a little off about my son. But the moment you sit down and you talk with him and you realize that he wears his heart on his sleeve and he's one of the most sensitive kids that like I've ever known, like then you're like, oh, like Mini-Wheat's he's a normal kid, And again, it comes back to, as a parent, I put so much weight on teaching him values that would obviously go against something that you're going to see in a game, and then we talk about that kind of stuff. Like a great example, like Left 4 Dead. It's a pretty violent game, but outside of Left 4 Dead, and I don't have like that big of a problem with it, partially because it's zombies, but like we talk about the whole concept of zombies, and it's almost like we make it a lighthearted thing, and like, yeah, you're shooting all these former humans in the head, and it's like pretty violent overall, and people are getting thrown around and dying and stuff. But you know what? He's having fun, and he doesn't look at it from like a violent perspective. He looks at it from like an I'm having fun perspective. And someone could probably just turn that around and say, well then, yeah, just wait until he has that AK in his hand and he just wants to have some fun. And again, it comes down to, how am I involved, outside of what I'm allowing him to play?
Yeah,
that
I
makes
definitely
sense.
think. Yeah, no, totally. The parenting aspect of it is something that never really enters the discussion. Like children are just exposed to the media almost in isolation, and then they go and misbehave almost in isolation, and that parental through road that we know takes place doesn't really get talked about, and the importance of being involved in your kids sort of development. But I one of the problems I think I've got with it right now is like, and it is, I don't ever want to be against anything in particular. Like I don't consider myself to be a big advocate of censorship. I'm very liberal in my tastes and my beliefs. So I find it very hard to be against anything, and I'm not against violence in video games or young people playing video games or whatnot. But what I will say is that society always seems to be at loggerheads with things that it doesn't understand. Always the way, like 1900s. You can Google this. People are lobbying against the waltz as a provocative sexual dance, right? And like this new dance trend is going to tear down the fabric of society. Now, like if you want to take the fucking girl to the prom, you might get a tutor to teach you how to waltz so you don't look like a dickhead. In the 50s, it was rock and roll. And in my generation, the first thing I remember being really demonized in the 80s was video nasties. If people remember this, like when the VHS videos were out, and things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and stuff like that, which are really tame kind of horror films by today's standards, and were all banned. I mean, literally, our local video store around the corner from me, you had to go in and ask for them specifically. Like the video nasties, they had softcore pornography up there, but if you wanted to watch like a video nasty, like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre or some shit like that, you had to ask for the guy, and he'd get it out from under the fucking thing in like his special safe and act all leery about it, which is amazing now for like a celebrated horror film. So I think what we need to say is like, tastes definitely change, and the key, but not only that, the key thing is understanding. I think we can understand that exposing kids to violent films isn't in their best interest, not necessarily because it will make them a killer, but because it can be a traumatic experience for a child that doesn't know how to separate reality and fantasy. And we know through child developmental psychology, at 7 years old, up until 7 years old, they still have that issue in separating fantasy and reality.
So are we in agreement that there are some movies that we wouldn't bring our kids to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I mean,
Are there some movies you wouldn't bring Mini-Wheat to?
I mean, like, there's always, everything's always on the table, right? I look at everything on a completely individual basis. I'll give an example. Like, we just sat down and we watched the Matrix trilogy recently. They're all R. It's not because of sex. And that's probably the biggest thing for me, because a lot of stylized violence these days is just like eye candy. I'm not the biggest fan of the super realistic, like gunplay and stuff where you see like heads imploding. That I tend to, move away from. But like, there have been instances where we have sat down and we have watched a movie that there are probably other parents that would take off the table, because for me, I'm like, I like to watch Mini-Wheat think. That's why we watch the Matrix. Of course, I know he's going to think all the kung fu and all the gunplay is going to be awesome, but the movie gets him to actually like use his brain and ask questions and that sort of a thing. So I always look at everything like from that perspective. I don't ever carelessly say, yeah, you can watch it. There's always got to sort of be a reason for it. And I don't think that's like helicopter parenting, because it's not like Mini-Wheat is coming to me and like, yo, Dad, let me check out this Friday the 13th. Here there's like 20 of them. It's not, and maybe it'll be that way in 2 years. He's obviously very selective, but, I think that, we'd mentioned YouTube and whatnot. A lot of cultural things affect what he wants to see. Like, he brought up the Matrix because someone else referenced it, or someone else made a video that had like the Matrix. So it's like, hey, this is a cool opportunity, for us to watch this and to watch Mini-Wheat go like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, with movies and games, there are different levels of violence, right? And some of them are more fantastic, right? So they're not realistic at all. Watching Saving Private Ryan versus like watching The Matrix is completely different. Levels, right. And I think that's the same case when it comes to games. I think there are some games shooting zombies where zombies just, they don't exist. And I could definitely, the parenting aspect is important, and explaining to them just this is not real, and this is that whole bit. I think it's awesome and great, and everybody should do. But then there's, there are other games that are meant to be, the graphics are meant to be real. They are meant to be like shooting a guy in the head and killing him. And particularly in the single player versions too. Like, I've played Call of Duty single versions, and there's some scenes that just make my stomach turn a little bit. And I'm like, there's no way I'd let Jaden play this. Like, no way. The multiplayer, but definitely not the single player, because it makes my stomach turn a little bit, So does that, is there any kind of differentiation for you there, Marcus? Just playing devil's advocate here.
I guess let me ask you guys a question, because there's a lot of cases where James doesn't necessarily play those games, but I might play those games. Yeah. And of course, like when I play games, that gets his attention. But I'm always okay with sort of at least me. I'm thinking of an example like Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider has some pretty like gruesome deaths.
Getting impaled and stuff. Yeah.
It's like such a small fraction percentage. Do I feel like my kid is affected when Lara Croft gets impaled through the neck by a wooden stake? Like, you know what? Actually, I'm happy, because he goes like, "Oh, God, that had to hurt." It's like, well, he reacted to it. It wasn't at least I don't know. I think that probably some people think that I'm crazy, but like if I felt like it was having this adverse reaction on him, or if I could look at his face and see like, when I was a kid, I was I was the one who was like, I would sneak over to friends' houses because I loved horror movies, and I'd want to watch all the shit that my parents would let me watch. Like that didn't really have an effect on me. There's a part of me that, like, I'm a little kid, I want to be scared. Like that's my adrenaline rush. Like I'm a junkie for it. Like I do feel that my son has a little bit of that in him when it comes to games. He watched me play The Walking Dead, and again, he wasn't playing it, but he was sort of involved in the experience, covering his eyes every once in a while is sort of, I don't know.
You're an engaged parent though, Marcus, and that's, I think, through all of this, what we've all said, the most important thing is being an engaged parent or caregiver, because you're right about everything should be on the table. We shouldn't just automatically say, well, and I do the same thing. Like if it's R rated, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not something that could be appropriate for my kids. And that, I mean, even for my 16-year-old, like if he's going to go to movies with his buddies, for the most part, I'm okay with most of the movies that have come out. But if I know there's one that's like really dark, like remember the movie, it was a 9mm or 8, it was about
8mm?
Snuffing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
I
8mm.
remember that one. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, a movie like that, or I'll look at movies and it's got, it's R-rated because it's got rape and strong sexuality. I probably would be like, that's just not an appropriate movie for you to be seeing. It's just not stuff that you need to be taking in, garbage in, garbage out kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, but I think the key really is engaged parents, more than anything. Like I said, it's parents that go buy the video game for their kids that have no idea what it's about. And then the kid is acting up or being stupid or whatever, and they have no one to blame but themselves. And it doesn't have anything to do with the video game. The parent was not engaged enough to even know what was going on. But somebody, of course, will come along and blame the video game. But I think where we need to be blaming the people is the parents and their lack of engagement.
Kids are sneaky. Kids are sneaky, man. Because I was in GameStop yesterday or the day before when GTA 5 came out, and there was a kid who was just like basically duping his mom into buying him it, and it wasn't until the last second when the guy at the cash register said that, it's one of the most controversial games right now, right? and then the mom had to like basically wait until his dad approved it after that, but.
I mean, I think that.
And I bet Dad was like, "Hell yeah, I want to play."
That's what he was thinking. Yeah.
I think the main point is as well, like what we're talking about, parents being engaged and switched on. Like when TV was, the big thing. How many families did you know growing up where it was like the TV was like the babysitter, right? Like the parents would be off doing their own thing, plonk the kid down in front of the TV, and you give them the remote control, and there wasn't any, they could watch whatever they wanted. There was no sort of input. It was as long as they were quiet and just getting on with it in the corner. And I think the most dangerous thing you could probably do as a fucking parent, or the worst thing you could do, would be to let the internet be the fucking babysitter, right? Like you just plonk them in front of a computer or and just basically leave them, like to their own devices.
Go read Reddit. Go read Reddit for 2 hours. I'm taking a nap.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wouldn't wish that on anyone 2 hours straight Reddit. But fuck, I mean that's worse than some of the shit we've been talking about. Just to bring it back a little bit though, like about games and how they all solicit controversy, and some of the things that we can expose to. I've actually sent you a screenshot in the chat, Chris. I don't know if you want to bring it up or not. But way back in the day, you had, I know this is going to sound really weird, but you had like adult games, but on like 8-bit. 8-bit systems,
right?
And you used to buy them in adverts in the back page of newspapers, or even pornographic magazines. And these games were like, I mean, they're a bit like a curio now. They're kind of weird and obscure. But people actually used to get these, and they would play them, like for that mild titillation. Now, one of the most controversial ones was one called Custer's Revenge. Which is the screenshot I've sent you, Chris. Okay, and basically the
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. What you had to do on this game was you had to dodge like things dropping down from the sky to get to a naked Native American woman who was tied to a cactus, and you were General Custer back from the dead for whatever reason. It didn't make a lot of sense plot wise, and you had to have sex with the woman, non-consensual sex. with the woman. So, and you can see from the screenshot, you can see there's some pixelated boobs and there's a pixelated erection. And it's going to sound really weird, but I wouldn't let my kid play that game because of the sort of intimations that are in it. You know, like the sort of inappropriate response to sexuality, the idea it's okay to rape a tied-up woman, the very dodgy racist undertones. I would still have a problem with that finding its way into my house, perhaps even more so than Call of Duty. So I think it's, again, you've kind of got to look at what, you've got to make your own sort of moral judgment and kind of look at what's appropriate. And it's like you said about the R-rated thing. Like, an R-rated movie doesn't mean that my kid can't handle it. Like, one of the best days of my life when I was about 9 or 10 was I stayed at my uncle's house and I watched Predator and Terminator back to back. Fuck me, what a great day. Like, that changed my life. It was amazing. But equally, there were some films that I'm sure he would have said, nah, you're not watching this.
Exactly. Right.
So it's about kind of making your own smart, informed decisions. And that's the key thing, is the information. Too many people take a back seat. They don't want to learn about online gaming. They don't want to learn about gaming as a whole. And because they don't, they then apply a very ignorant standard to it and assume that everything's bad, or everything's good, and actually it's shades of grey.
Yeah.
You as a parent need to make the call.
Right. All right, guys. Well, why don't we take some questions from you guys, the viewers, and the way you ask us, or you can call in, is add me on Skype. My Skype ID is ChanmanV, and I'll pull you in. We've got a few callers here. Let's see how we do with callers today. Actually, that guy's offline now. It's not good. Let me see.
I think he's gone to download Custer's Revenge. I think.
Yeah, immediately.
All right, here we go. Here we go. Let me switch this overlay real quick. Pull in. It looks like Benjamin. Oh, Biomengen. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, how's it going? Welcome to Climbing the Ladder. You got a question for us?
Sorry, I'm just turning off the stream real quick.
Okay, no problem.
Hi, Chanman.
Hey, how's it going, man?
So I wanted to ask you, the question I had was about violent video games. And obviously a lot of people like them because it engages them in a very emotional way. Like, you watch an act of violence happen and it just affects you so emotionally. Like, wow, that looks so painful, or wow, that looks so awesome.
Right.
And a lot of people like that because it gives them a kind of high, just like a drug, and that's why a lot of people play them. So if violent games can, it can lead people to commit violence, people that already have problems, it can lead them to commit acts of violence, then is it okay to act for us normal people to like those games? Is it okay to, promote those kind of games? Even though it's good for us, it may be bad for others. That was my question.
Everything, I think everything in life is going to be similar to that, though, and it's all about moderation. I mean, we can't put a huge blanket over it and say, well, because it's going to have a negative effect on a few, that we just need to get rid of it for everyone. I mean, maybe really the big question is how do we identify who those children are, those people are that are more susceptible to taking to heart this violence that they see, and we need to stamp that part of it out, not necessarily the game itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always going to be outliers, right, for every situation. I mean, it's true for a lot of things, like you were saying. But Richard, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, it's a lot easier, isn't it, to basically point to the kind of the thing the straw that broke the camel's back, and go, right, we're going to ban that. We're going to make sure no one can get access to that again. And we see this knee-jerk reaction from governments and from politicians all the fucking time. You know, where it's like, you can't. They don't want to do what they're there to do, and that is fix the social problems that create the damaged people, the damaged families, the impoverished people, both culturally and financially, where we see a lot of these people who commit these atrocities emanate from. We can't fix those societal problems, so what we do is we do a knee-jerk reaction, and we focus our energy on trying to prevent them having access to something which isn't the root of the problem by any means, which isn't to say that it isn't something worth looking at, but wouldn't it be great if we could go back to the start, as John says, and look at the actual underlying problems? And, you know, let's try fixing those in society before we go off on one and talk about how, you know, for some sort of greater good, again, that phrase cropping up again, we need to prevent people having access to certain types of material across the board, as if that's going to fix the problem, because that's the easy option. You know, and I see this all the time. It just makes me really sad that it's almost an admission of defeat to tackle some of our bigger problems within society.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat, some people are saying we should ban food because it makes people fat. I think that's actually a really good point. I think a lot of it has to do with moderation, and too much of anything is not good. I think that's a really good point.
Okay, thanks for the question.
taking my, thanks for having me on, guys.
What about dudes who eat all the time and don't gain a stitch, though? Like, not me, obviously. I'm not that guy, obviously.
Me too.
I'm that guy.
I'm that guy too. The guy everybody hates.
Yeah, like what about guys like Chris, who's always stuffing his face, right? But he's as thin as a rake. Look at him. You don't ban food for him. He don't need moderation. So that's not even the answer, you know, to make a flippant off the cuff remark about a serious thing.
All right, we got Evan here. See if he's going to take this call. He's typing to me, but Evan, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. What's up?
Hey, welcome to Climbing the Ladder.
Hey, I was wondering if any or all of you had watched Penn and Teller's Bullshit, the show that used to be on TV on Showtime.
That's a good show. That was a good show.
Yeah.
Amazing show.
On gun control.
I don't think I saw that
Yes.
episode. I didn't see that episode.
I believe I've seen that one. Yeah.
Well, in case like people don't remember, it was they had a kid who was who played violent video games like GTA, etc., and then they took him out to a real gun range, and they had him shoot a gun, and after that he was terrified of guns because the violence in video games doesn't translate to real life, excluding kids with psychological or problems, like other kinds of problems.
Right?
So it's like,
I mean, I'm sure there's probably cases where you could actually find something against that, but in the article that you brought up in the recent shootings that we've had, like, dude, I just don't know how people have access to this type of shit, because I'd like to say that I'm a pretty resourceful guy, and I don't even know what the first fucking thing I would do if I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to get a gun today. Like, I actually have no clue. But with that being said, like, I find it kind of very interesting that exactly what you said about shooting a gun in real life versus like the online equivalent of something the controller shaking in your hand a little bit. In a lot of the cases of these violent video game connections that have been made, I don't know why this parallel is drawn, but there have been like servicemen. There have been people who were ex-military. There are people who've had access to weapons of destruction, and I don't know if that has an effect on someone like who fires a gun regularly, maybe who has even killed the person before. Like, that could have an extreme adverse effect, I would imagine, on someone to be able to associate real life memories to what they're actually doing and playing and seeing on the screen. I don't even know how to tackle that side of it. But I would say, in general, I would guess that there'd be a lot of individuals that would be in the shoes of that exact same person, is that it can be a terrifying experience to shoot a gun. And we're not talking about like a little 22. We're talking about like they gave this kid an AR-15 and they're like, yo. And suddenly you feel the power, of a gun. And I mean, yeah, I would imagine that that's very true for a lot of people.
well, AR-15s, like, I don't know how much any of you shoot like real guns in real life, if at all. But
Hello?
Yeah.
Did we lose him?
I lost audio from you
Okay.
guys.
Oh no, I think we're just sat here waiting to see where it goes.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
You
wait,
just
yeah.
cut off
Yeah,
for
yeah.
a second. You just cut off. Your mic just cut. Or you were saying something. AR-15.
Well, like I
yeah.
don't know how much you guys shoot or like how much it's relevant to like what kind of gun it is, because like AR-15, like shooting an AR-15 versus like a 22 isn't super different necessarily.
I don't think it matters. I think the point is that you put a gun into the hands of a kid who has done nothing but shot virtual guns, and that can be a
becomes real.
terrifying experience.
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't matter.
It becomes real.
It could be a 9mm. It could be a BB gun, but like John said, it becomes real at that point.
Right.
Right, and that can be like scary and like yeah, that can be psychologically scary for certain people, but I think making
some
that
people
like
it's not going to
equivalency-
be. But see,
Right,
that's
like-
the thing too. We have to understand this. For some people, it's not going to be. There, some of those kids are going to shoot that gun and be like, "Oh man, this is awesome. This is the real thing now." So, although that experiment worked to kind of show that, you know, I guess and I'm not saying that Penn and Teller actually did it this way, but it fit the agenda that video games have no effect. But there
Yeah.
are, I'm sure, cases where it does. And what's so funny about this, and I think about this, is that I use video games in talking with my son, the positive side of video games. I always remind him, though, that you can't speed in your vehicle or jump ramps and land a perfect 10. But when I first started taking him driving, when he was 14, just 2 years ago, I literally told him, look at this as if when you're playing some of the racing games that we have, and there's the one where the object is to crash. I can't remember the name of it now. I used to run tournaments for it, but Burnout. Yeah, actually, it's a really good game. As a side note, but I would literally tell him, okay, remember when we play your video games, you're always looking ahead when you're playing a racing game. You're always looking at the next move and just keeping your eyes peeled and seeing what's on around you. I literally use video games to explain to him kind of driving and how that can benefit him. And people are always quick to say, oh, video games have such a positive attitude, hand-eye coordination, they make you smarter and faster and things like that. Absolutely. So for anyone that's able to say those things, they have to be able to admit that it's very possible that some of the things will have a negative effect on children that take it that way. Again, a little intervention by a parent, to say, hey, a real gun is going to be much different than shooting this gun in the video game, would go a long way in helping people understand that, would go a long way in kind of helping curb some of these things where kids just kind of fly off the handle and let the non-reality of the internet get to them in real life.
I gotta say as well, though. I mean, if you're in a fucking position where you're sat around and you're fantasizing about murdering a bunch of people, and obviously to a certain degree we've all had that fantasy, but it stays, you have it for a split second. Your boss at work mugs you off one time too many, or your co-worker, uses your mug, and you think, fuck it, I'd love to come in here with a gun. It's there for a second and it goes. But some people dwell on it and some people fantasize about it, and obviously some people, a very small percentage, go on to fucking do it. But I think if you sat around thinking about that for prolonged periods of time, your life must fucking suck. And I don't think it's got anything to do with games or anything to do with what types of media you've been exposed to. If you're wallowing in playing Call of Duty for 8 hours a day while fantasizing about killing all your co-workers or just a bunch of strangers or whatever, again, it comes down to what's going on in your life. Your life must suck. And we need, why does this individual's life suck? Let's take a look at that, rather than sort of looking at the back end of it, which is the tragic aftermath,
Right.
and maybe how they spent, the last 2 weeks of their life. What gets somebody to a point where you want to kill a bunch of people, and a lot of the times, again, it's going to be an environmental factor, something societal, something bigger, like post-traumatic stress disorder from some bullshit invasion of a foreign country, or fighting a war that no fucker should be fighting. But let's not talk about that, right? Let's talk about Call of Duty. Let's not talk about how this guy had post-traumatic stress disorder from military service and got no fucking medical help whatsoever afterwards, wasn't even assessed to see if he was a danger, he could be reintegrated into society. Let's not blame the fucking system. Let's blame a computer game, and we can all sleep a little bit easier at night, right? So, you know, I think you've got to fucking look at, again, a lot of these things, there's a point where it starts, there's a route, and we never go there. We always come in at the end, and we're like, oh, if we fix this at the end, we fix the problem. But it's bullshit, we haven't.
All right, thanks for your question, Evan.
Hold on, can I have one more really quick?
All right, really quick. We got time. We're gonna get one more.
Okay, so we can like all agree that if people are psychologically damaged, for lack of a better word, that they may or may not, that video games may or may not have a like a catalyst to violence, or it may like assist in people's fantasies. But really, what I want to say is that when I hear on the news that video games are a training manual for violence, that's what really gets me pissed off, because video games, even Call of Duty, Battlefield, Arma A, those games are not actual indicators of how even guns work on a basic level. The only way that I've seen guns even remotely realistically portrayed is an indie game, Receiver, if any of you have played that. So I think that was really like the second point I wanted to make, is that even if you are fantasizing about those things and like you have those psychological problems, video games are not an accurate catalyst to like what perpetrating violence is actually like, or even just shooting guns, etc.
Sure.
Interesting you should mention that, though, because when I was out at DreamHack, and I wrote a piece about this because the military were there, the Swedish military, and they were basically recruiting young people to be, you know, whatever, fucking tank drivers and shit. And if you looked at the controls on their tanks, it wasn't a simulation. It was a get in and sit down and have a go on a real tank, and you know, you right in the middle of fucking DreamHack. You know, it was huge. It looked exactly like an Xbox controller. And I've got friends, and I believe even it might even be referenced in a Michael Moore documentary. But I got friends who served time in the American military told me the same shit. Looks just like an Xbox controller. Yeah. So I'm not saying the games themselves are like training manuals for violence. But what I am saying is the government and the military are sort of recognizing where kids' aptitudes might lie, recognizing how kids are spending their time, and they're trying to make it easier for you to become a government-approved killing machine. Through the use of mimicking the controls. So there is a slight degree of truth in that. It's just not the hysterical Daily Mail, I played Call of Duty once, now I'm in Al-Qaeda bullshit.
Right, but civilians going on shooting sprees aren't in tanks. I'm pretty sure we can agree on that. Like, because essentially this conversation is a result of like the Navy Yard shooting.
Mm-hmm. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, in link with your point, though, the boundaries are starting to blur a little bit. And, you know, the military are aware of people playing games, and they're incorporating that technology into it.
7 years ago, GGL won a $2 million contract with America, with the Army, for the U.S. Army, who makes their own video game called America's Army. And they make it specifically to data mine and collect the demographic that they'd like to bring into the military. And our job was to get as many sign-ups as possible, and that they would use those to turn around. The military spends millions of dollars in video games every year, and you can look that up. I mean, that's they'll tell you we invest in video games. One, for the demographic, and two, because of, I know people are gonna, you know, the hand-eye coordination, just the understanding of things. I mean, everything we do in the military is very, very technical now. It's very, there's so much technology in it that it just makes sense, really. So yeah, but you're right. It's been catching on, and it's starting to catch on even more.
All right, buddy. Well, that's gonna have to end that question.
I've taken more than my time.
Question.
Thanks.
Good discussion. Good discussion.
Thank you.
He's taking so much time that I don't think we're gonna have enough time for any more questions.
Oh, we can do one more.
You wanna do one more? You guys okay with one more?
Sure.
All right, one more. All right. Bell Brony.
If he says it's just a quick one, just disconnect him straight away.
It's climbing the ladder, man. There's no such thing as a quick one on climbing the ladder. So, All right, Belbroni?
Valbron, hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, what's up, man? Welcome to
Yo.
Climbing the Ladder.
All right, so my question is, it pretty much there's a couple of parts to it. The first part would be, do you guys think that there's enough emphasis on the fact that video games are pretty much fantasy and they don't translate to real life? The second part is, do you think there should be a bigger emphasis between the two? And I don't think you can discard this as common sense, because even though it sounds like something simple, but I don't think necessarily everyone gets the idea that it's just a game, it doesn't translate to real life.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, keep in mind, like, let's look at the evolution of video games for a second, right? Because when we were playing on, we'll kind of skip past like the Commodore or some of the eras that Richard talked about earlier, because, well, I mean, like, graphically it was tougher to achieve, like, any level of realism. But obviously, as graphics and processing power got better, that meant that games could start to look more realistic. But in the 8-bit, the 16-bit era, there wasn't too many examples of, like, dude, you know what? Check out this game, because when you shoot the guys, they like explode into, a bunch of blood, and it's awesome animation. It was, we're jumping on turtles and we're carrying, things like that. You look at where we're at now, and you have a game like Grand Theft Auto 5, which is nothing but a hodgepodge of crime and shit that you would never do in real life to tell a story. That's the whole freaking game, and it's because they can do that now. When it comes to that, I just feel like we have also grown up as these systems have evolved. And we don't want to stomp on turtle shells anymore. We want to probably stomp on people's heads. And this is because we grow up and we stop watching Sesame Street and we start watching, Breaking Bad, and we get older and we want more mature content. We want these mature things, right? That's why we have ratings and whatnot. The same thing has happened with video games. The problem is that it's still getting in the hands of kids outside of that, which is a problem everywhere, right? Like, I want to play the more mature games that are going to be geared towards me, a 36-year-old man, but inevitably a 13-year-old kid is going to get their hands on that and play it too. What do you guys think about what the caller was asking?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get the point. I think one of the things that upsets me a little bit is the way the gaming industry still needs to sort of solicit controversy in a way to sort of shift units. And I think it creates a lot of games that are sort of like... Grand Theft Auto is a game that's grown into be something that of actual artistic merit. But I think if you look at the very first Grand Theft Auto, it's actually really cringeworthy, childish, pathetic. Like running over 5 Hare Krishnas and it says Garanga. The old top-down bullshit. Like it was a pathetic game that was basically there to bait the tabloids. And when the tabloids reacted to it negatively, they sold a bunch of units off the back of that. It's not a good game. The original game is actually really poor. And I think there's a lot of games that do this. There's a lot of games that basically include needlessly controversial scenes, which don't actually pin up into a narrative, or they don't serve a story, or indeed it's not adult content. Because Breaking Bad's a great example, because there you see sort of the impact, the consequences of such actions when you watch that TV show. It's emotional.
Sure.
You've got a connection to the characters. It's very realistic in its depiction of what it's like to be Mr. Chips turned Scarface. It's realistic, right? But if you look at a lot of games where it's just needlessly violent, like say tabloid baiting, sensationalist bullshit, it doesn't actually serve any greater purpose, and it is very unrealistic and cartoon-like. And I'd say those games are kind of almost more dangerous in a way. They're going to be the games that are a bit more insidious than ones that show the actual consequences of violence. Ones that have a very adult theme. Ones that have very unpleasant characters within it, because it's not a glorification of violence.